Hi all, hope we're safe and well. Today we're going to be having a look at the third of our anthology poems, and that is Follower. This is one that ties on nicely with the two that we've covered so far, with Mother Any Distance and Walking Away, as it is to do with parental relationships and how those relationships can evolve and change over time. Once again, we are going to be using the Mitzel grid to help us to analyse. We're going to be looking at the meaning, the imagery, the tone, the structure and the language of the poem. Hope it's really useful. Obviously make notes as you go through this video, and ideally if you can get a copy of the poem to annotate, that would be really useful. Okay, initially then we're just going to have a read through the poem and see what we can get from it. So, my father worked with a horse plough. His shoulders globed like a full sail strung. Between the shafts and the furrow, his horse strained at his clicking tongue. An expert, he would set the wing and fit the bright steel-pointed sock. The sod rolled over without breaking, at the head rig with a single pluck. Of reins the sweating team turned round and back into the land. His eye narrowed and angled at the ground, mapping the furrow exactly. I stumbled in his hobnailed wake, fell sometimes on the polished sod. Sometimes he rode me on his back, dipping and rising to his plod. I wanted to grope and plough, to close one eye, stiffen my arm. All I ever did was follow in his broad shadow round the farm. I was a nuisance, tripping, falling, yapping always. But today it is my father who keeps stumbling behind me and will not go away. Okay, so considering the meaning of the poem Follower, the poet Seamus Heaney is famously interested in rural life. He grew up on a farm, and this poem comes from a collection which is all to do with this idea of childhood, about innocence and experience and growing up, and about life living in this sort of countryside environment. So the meaning of the poem is exploring the relationship between a child and a father, developing as the child grows up and matures. And as we can see straight away, there's linking themes between Walking Away and Mother Any Distance, which we covered in our first two videos. So the main idea of the poem is the first 5 stanzas are all to do with the poet as a child and how his father was an inspirational figure who the poet aspired to be like. He was impressed by his control over the farm, and particularly his control over the physical labour that the farm entailed, things like ploughing, controlling the horses, managing the farm, and the way that the father was an impressive and powerful character in his life. As the poem concludes, however, the poet has come to the realisation, quite a cynical realisation, that now his father needs him more than he needs his father. His father is reliant on him as he's become an old man, and how the poet has developed and become the more important figure in that relationship. So it's all about the evolution of that father-son relationship across time, and how initially as a child the poet was very impressed and felt inspired by his father, whereas as he grew older, his father becomes more of he considers him more like a burden, and the sort of feeling of that relationship and how it develops. Okay, imagery-wise, there's some really interesting things going on with Follower, and how the poet is describing his father as an impressive character, as someone that he looks up to. In the first stanza, he describes the father as someone whose shoulders globed like a full sail strung. So here he's using the simile to describe his father like a ship, and the sail on that ship being massive, impressive, powerful even. And that's really, really interesting, the fact that the shoulders globe, that sort of curved, massive impressiveness that we could explore there with that image. Throughout the poem we have images to do with the farmland, so the fact that the father is narrowing out his eyes and mapping the furrow exactly. We can imagine that. We can imagine the father looking at this and working out these mathematically precise furrows that he's using in the field. We also have the image of the child who was yapping, tripping, falling always. That's a really interesting image. We can imagine the child, however the father supporting him by he rode him on his shoulders, the fact that they can carry his son. These are really, really precise images that we have. However, by the end of the poem we have that change, and we can see the older father stumbling behind him and will not go away. So we can imagine this image of a young man being followed by his father. There's lots of imagery to do with the idea of impressiveness and legacy. We could talk about his broad shadow around the farm. There's metaphor where it's the literal shadow because he's an impressive man, but also that metaphorical idea of his shadow touching everything, and the poet cannot escape that and can't get away from that. Tonally, the poem is quite interesting, as what we have is two sort of stages in the child's relationship with his father and how he feels across the time. So at the start of the poem, the poet feels that he is a nuisance. He feels that he's tripping, falling, yapping. He feels potentially intimidated a little bit by his father. He feels that his father is a perfect example that he wants to follow. He says, "I wanted to grow up and plough." He feels that he is stumbling, and he feels that he is not going to ever match these impressive feats that his father is able to complete. He feels that he needs his father's support, the fact that his father has to carry him on his shoulders as he's dipping and falling and rising to the plod of the horse. That metaphorical image of needing his father's support and needing that. It could be tinged with a bit of sadness because he didn't go into this farming industry and didn't feel that he followed in his father's footsteps. He says in the poem, "All I ever did was follow," and he feels that this shadow that his father casts is too big a legacy for him to be able to follow, and he can't ever cope with that. However, tonally, by the end of the poem, the poet comes to a sort of new realization that his father is now the one who requires his support, that his father is following and will not go away, which could be seen with a tinge of sadness because it could be that he's quite cynical about this. He could be disappointed with his father, but also you could look at it from an aspect that they still have a close relationship, that he's still here, that he's still he's proud of the fact that his father now needs him, and he's happy to offer that support. So totally there are quite interesting things going on here. The poet could be seen to be quite self-conscious about his own choices and self-conscious about how he never feels he'd be able to match his father's ability and expertise, but also at the same time we have this growing maturity by the end of the poem where he's looking at being a more sophisticated character. He's developed into his own man, he's developed into his own person. It's a nice little comparison that we can draw with Walking Away that we covered in the last video, where we have a son's perspective on that shift in relationship. Again, structurally, there are some really interesting things that are going on with Follower. The first three stanzas that we have are focused on the boy's impressions of the father. So we have lots of descriptions about him and how he maps the furrow exactly, narrowed his eyes at the ground, that he drew the sweating team around, all these sort of physical images of his father. And the opening three stanzas, the first half of the poem, is there to create that impression of impressiveness, how his father is someone who is sophisticated, who is talented, who is someone who would be difficult to follow. The next two stanzas, so stanza 4 and stanza 5, are the poet's voice struggling to come to terms with his own identity. It is very self-reflective, and it's quite revealing about how insecure he feels and his admiration for his father and his own uncertainties about what the future might hold. However, by the final stanza, we have another shift in perspective where the boy has come to a maturity and a mature decision where he knows now that his father also requires his support. It's not necessarily that one-way relationship, and that he's now in control. He has that sort of deep and meaningful relationship with his father, where his father also relies on him. So interesting structure changes there, and interesting changes in tone as we go throughout the poem. The rhyme scheme of the poem is a regular rhyme scheme with some little half rhymes in there, which indicates to us that the poet has had time to reflect on things, that the poet has had time to structure his ideas and order in a logical manner. So this idea of the regular rhyme structure gives that. It gives a sense of completeness, a sense of wholeness, and potentially a positive reflection on their relationship. However, we do have examples of enjambment throughout the poem, looking at where lines run on from one another, which could indicate a sort of muddled thought process, or might indicate that the poet is struggling to come to terms with something. Okay, one thing we might want to consider when looking at the language of the poem is look at the use of verb choice by Heaney within the poem. So initially, when we're describing the father and we're looking at the father's actions, we have a lot of verb choices to create a sense of impressiveness, a sense of precision, and a sense of sort of perfect understanding of the world. We had narrowing, we have mapping, we have the shoulders globing, but we also have a sense of physical impressiveness, because we have things like sweating and strained. These are verbs that are used to create an impression of someone who is sort of powerful, but also in complete control of their environment. We have adjectives such as an expert, which is used to show that he is the master of everything that he does and everything that he sees. When we look at the verb choice for the son, there is a lot to do with the immaturity that he feels. So the fact that he is stumbling, the fact that he's tripping, falling, yapping, all these verb choices are very significant because they create an impression of an annoyance, an irritant, rather than someone who is contributing to the society, this world, the farm in which he lives on. We also have this idea of precision and exactness. So as the sod rolling over without breaking, we have the way the sock of the plough works through the soil creates a sense of completeness and sense of power from the father. So there's lots of interesting uses of language there. We also might consider, as we spoke about earlier with imagery, the idea of metaphor and the idea of dual meanings, with the idea of his father's shadow being something that he ultimately cannot come to terms with because it's a legacy. It's something that's rather than just a physical shadow, it's a legacy that's going to linger around the farm far longer than his father will. We could also consider the use of pronouns. So in the first 3 stanzas, we have a lot of references to he and him and my. So talking about the father, so as we said with the structure part of this analysis, the first 3 stanzas are focusing on his father. So the fact that the initial impressions that we get out of the father, the following stanzas are all to do with the poet being self-reflective. So we see a lot more of I in there. So we could consider how that's important and how that is significant. We also have some examples of repetition. So the ideas of parallels between the poem and juxtapositions. We have, at one point, we have the boy stumbling in stanza 3, but by the end of the poem in stanza 6, we have the same word stumbled repeated, and that could indicate a sense of the parallels between them and the changes that have taken place. Also, we could consider the use of tenses. So the majority of the poem is written in the past tense. So things like, I wanted to grow up and plough. My father worked with the horse plough. This is all past tense. This is all recollection of things that have been and gone. However, by the end of the poem, what we have is a reflection in the present day. And now it is my father who is behind me, who will not go away. So we have this change in tense, looking at this is what has gone before, and now this is what is happening in the present. So the use of language is quite significant, focusing and zooming in on those keywords and considering their significance to the entire poem. Okay, once again for you to do, there are 2 essay questions, the first of which focuses purely on follower, and I've gone for a structure type question this time, which might be a bit more tricky to get your head around. And then the second one is having a look at follower compared to another anthology poem of your choice. Now, if you'd like to use Mothering Distance or Walking Away that we've covered in the videos, then you're more than welcome to. If you want to go for something different, another of the anthology poems, then again, that's absolutely fine. Have a look at them and stay tuned at the end, and we'll have our today's film recommendation. Okay, today's film recommendation, I've gone for something a bit different. Something I caught up recently on Netflix, and I wanted to go and see it at the cinema, but I didn't manage to go and see it. And that is Lady Bird. It's a really, really interesting film, and particularly important for what we've been talking about today, about the relationship between a girl and her mother and growing up in Sacramento, California. It's really, really interesting to see it from a teenage perspective, but also from like an adult perspective, looking on at this girl who's changed her name to Lady Bird. Really, really interesting, quite funny, quite heartwarming in places, quite terrifying in places. It's really, really good. I would check it out. Next time we're going to have a look at Before You Were Mine, and then until then, stay safe.